So welcome everyone. My name is Yasmina Burik and I'm an officer at the MIT Postdoctoral Association. It is my pleasure to serve as a moderator of the Making the Cut Job Searching During a COVID-19 Economy. Here with me are also Dr. Natalia Barbour and Dr. Sami Hasnin, who will be moderating the Q&A. Let's begin with some logistics. We have 5 panelists. We're waiting for Hadley Sykes to join, and we received more than 240 registrations. We will record this panel and make it available on the PDA website. For the attendees catching us live right now, if you have a question for our panelists, feel free to type it in the Q&A tab. The Q&A tab allows you also to upvote a question using thumbs up. So please do so to avoid repeating the question. You may begin sending your questions now, and Natalia and Sami will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A. All the instructions are also available in the chat. So let's begin with what's currently going on. This year, COVID-19 has caused economic crisis, which resulted in hiring freezes, rescinded offers, and uncertainty in the academia. I checked with the Career and Development Office at MIT, and some of the academic job searches are still going on. However, according to Candor website, which has been crowdsourcing information on hiring freezes nationally for both academia and industry, at present, 65% out of 122 universities reported have imposed some form of hiring freeze. The references to this information are provided in the chat tab. So as the poster for this panel says, it's not a great time for PhDs in the academic job market. A lot of PhDs are worried about what's next for them and their future in the academe. The last economic crisis was from 2008 to 2010, according to the College of University Professional Association for Human Resources. In 2010, there was 30% decrease in assistant professor hires in public and 25% decrease in private universities. The survey included 298 universities. So because of that, we invited 5 distinguished faculty who were on the academic job market during the last economic crisis and made the cut. I want to thank each of you for carving out time to do this panel. So let's first begin with introductions. Our first panelist is Dr. Callie Babbitt. Callie, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I am a faculty now in the Rochester Institute of Technology, Golisano Institute for Sustainability, and was on the job market in 2008, coming from a postdoc at Arizona State University, where I cobbled together a postdoc in anthropology and engineering, and have a background in engineering, and then was fortunate enough to find a faculty position at RIT and at this Interdisciplinary Sustainability Institute.
Next is Mary Gehring. Dr. Mary Gehring, welcome.
Hi, I'm Mary. I am a faculty member in the MIT Biology Department in the Whitehead Institute. And I was on the job market in 2009-2010 season.
Next is Dr. Jesse Taylor. Welcome, Jesse.
Thanks. My name is Jesse Taylor. I'm a faculty member in the physics department at MIT. I joined the physics faculty in 2010. And before that, I was a postdoc at UC Berkeley. And so I remember my application process in 2008, interviews in 2009, and then tried my best to defer actually as long as I could, but started in the dead of winter in 2010.
Next to introduce herself is Dr. Dr. Mark Bath.
Yeah, hi, Mark Bata. So I'm in biological engineering at MIT and was on the market. The 2008-2009 cycle started in January of 2009. Nice to be here.
Welcome. And last is Dr. Hadley Sykes. Sorry about the trouble of getting in.
That's okay. So I am Hadley Sykes. I'm in the Department of Chemical Engineering. And I joined MIT in 2009. So I was in the job market in 2008.
Awesome. So first, I would like to ask our panelists to reflect on their experience from 2008 to 2010 economic crisis. And after that, we will start answering questions from the attendees. So based on your experience in searching academic jobs during the last economic crisis, what guidance, advice can you provide to PhDs seeking jobs in current economic crisis due to pandemic? We can start with Mark.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll be brief to open. So I think that maybe a couple thoughts. First of all, the crisis of 2008, 2009 was very different from today's crisis. That crisis was a financial banking crisis that was really resulted in a deep economic recession and downturn that was lasting for years, and it wasn't really just the immediate cycle that was impacted. It was the next couple cycles. There were cuts across the board, in universities and nationwide and internationally. So it was a bit different because this crisis is a biological crisis. So this biological crisis was obviously brought on by a pandemic. And I think that what we see already now with, the return of the stock market to pre-pandemic levels, the advent of antibody therapeutics coming out later this summer, very likely, vaccines coming out in the fall and well, more likely next year, together with all sorts of mediation strategies. I think that it's hard to predict how long this will actually last and what the actual impact will be on the economy in the coming year or two, and the endowments, which are largely tied to the stock market as well. So I would want to just open by saying I'm not sure we're really in as dire a circumstance as we were. However, of course, universities are being very conservative and have retracted or at least stalled many hiring positions. But I think that there's still a lot of hope for the summer for additional positions coming forward and kind of reopening of hiring because people can see a much shorter timeline of this negative impact on university operations than they saw back in 2008, 2009. So that's my first thought. And then I guess my second one is related to the turtle above that's swimming in what we think is Croatian waters. Faculty job hunting has a tremendous amount of uncertainty and luck. And it's not luck in the sense of one needs to be lucky to be prepared enough, but rather, even if you are perfectly prepared, and the best candidate you can be and a phenomenal candidate, there's a tremendous amount of luck in terms of finding the right fit in the right opportunity. They're looking for you, you're looking for them. And so that doesn't change, I think, whether you're in a negative circumstance or a challenging circumstance versus a normal circumstance, where my advice is to prepare the best that you can, but then cast a very wide net across all the possible opportunities that you think you would be interested in exploring and potentially going to start your career at, which I guess we may talk about more about what some of those choices can be. But I think that in the spirit of sort of Brené Brown and embracing vulnerability and uncertainty and chance in life, I think that the job search from the postdoc to faculty is one of the most kind of stressful in terms of uncertainty and unknowns of where you're going to land and how and when across the board in my career that I've faced. There are other uncertainties like getting grants and getting accepted in papers and so forth. But I think this transition is probably the most uncertain and kind of challenging from that perspective. So my point is that, prepare well, but then cast a wide net, do the best you can, but be open to many possibilities, because in the end, it is sort of circumstances and chance that will offer opportunities to present. And I'm optimistic that, that there will be more positions coming online than might currently be reflected in the market in the coming months. So.
Thank you for your comment. Let's see what Callie Babbitt, Dr. Callie Babbitt, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'll follow up a little bit with what Mark mentioned about uncertainty. One of the things that was so striking to me about job search in around the 2008-2009 timeframe is that universities were trying to proceed as usual and then realizing the economic constraints and then putting halts on searches. But it was happening over the much more traditional job cycle, where you see postings come about in the fall, trying to fill those for someone to start the previous fall. I had the added constraint of being part of a dual career couple. And so my husband was also looking for jobs at the time. And we even had an experience where he was on the way to the airport to fly out for an on-campus interview and got a call saying that the search had been canceled. So the uncertainty is a key issue. And I think one of the interesting things to sort of contrast this time is that the decision-making process by universities is likely to be very unpredictable. Mark mentioned the endowment, but I'm at a private university where tuition is the primary revenue source, and their decisions about this will largely be made based on enrollments in the fall. And those will largely be based on decisions to be on campus versus online, which will also be informed by state and other things outside of their control. So depending on the type of university where you're applying, the type of position, there's going to be, I would anticipate, probably several instances where the decision is made to go forward at some point with a search, but it's going to be off cycle. So being prepared at any point during the year to jump on those applications and to jump on these opportunities, which also means you're going to have to be continually looking for opportunities, not just kind of relying on them to all come out in the fall as usual. Search committees will be scrambling to form and then to go forward with the hiring. But the other piece of this that I would say is to use the time that comes about from this uncertainty to add as many tools in your tool belt as possible. Get a paper from your PhD finished that's been hanging over your head, learn a coding skill, add an additional methodology to your suite, write a literature review, anything you can do to continue putting tools in your tool belt so that when these opportunities do come about, you're able to take advantage of them quickly and with a more solid package.
Awesome. Let's move on to Mary Gehring.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, let me just follow a little bit up from that. So I think different institutions react differently to these types of financial crises. Especially Callie pointed out the difference between, institutions that are relying heavily on tuition are going to be more impacted with this particular crisis, for example, than maybe they would have been in the 2008-2010 crisis. Some institutions will view this actually as an opportunity to get good people. So I think when I was on the job market in 2009, that there were some institutions that really recognized this is our chance to get good people that maybe we wouldn't normally be able to get because there'd be greater competition. So the year I was on the job market, the University of California, the entire system was not hiring anyone. And in my field, there would normally be several jobs a year in the UC system. And so that meant that there were, that other institutions could be competitive with the University of California, where maybe normally they wouldn't have been. So I do think you have to look broadly. The year I applied was not the worst year. It was the year after the worst year. And so, there were several jobs that I could apply to. I think I applied to 28 places, but I was reaching, pretty far. I think you kind of always have to do that. You don't want to overextend yourself. You don't want to apply to a position that's just clearly, not at all related to what you do. But I think you do have to look for those opportunities, particularly at institutions that maybe have departments that they really want to, they want to get new faculty in. For example, I have a current postdoc who will be starting his lab at UC Berkeley this summer. He still has a job. They haven't rescinded the offer. And even though the UC system is not hiring right now, some departments still are. So he's joining a department that has a lot of older faculty that are all retiring. They need faculty to teach classes. And so I think up and coming institutions and also departments where maybe they are very top heavy are good opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. And then we're moving to Jesse Thaler.
Great. So I was glad to hear that Mark was optimistic. My view is maybe a little bit different. Now, I don't know how things are going to play out on the kind of pandemic side, but one of the things that seems different this time than when I was searching is that certain elements of academia, which I thought would never change, are now changing. For example, this quick transition to remote education. And in some sense, the structure of academia is potentially changing in a way that, yes, there are financial constraints, but this seems potentially different in that way. So from my own experience, I can give you 3 pieces of advice that were certainly helpful for me. And I don't know how they would translate to your personal circumstance, but let me just tell you them. So the first one is to try to secure flexibility if possible. And so, as I mentioned, I was a postdoc at UC Berkeley. And even before going on the job market, I negotiated with my supervisor at Berkeley to let me stay on longer than the term of my initial postdoc appointment. And this was something that, after a back and forth, I was granted actually an extra 2 years to spend on at UC Berkeley. Whether those extensions are possible depends on the situation that your PI might be in, but it was possible in my case. Advice that holds no matter when you're searching is to budget lots and lots of time for preparation. I was astonished how much time people said it was going to take, and it even took longer than that to prepare an application, to get ready for interviews and such. In fact, before I interviewed at MIT, I was going to go to a workshop at the Aspen Center for Physics, which is a wonderful place where there's workshop activities in the early morning and the evening with skiing during the day. And I was definitely not going skiing. I was going over and over and over my job talk. So budget lots of time for preparation. And then advice that was told to me that played out in different ways among my peers, but now is not the time to make plan B yet. I mean, academia it's a challenging road, but if that's your plan A, then focusing on that as plan A is beneficial. If nothing else, then to just kind of focus one's attention, because there are many other plan B options. I mean, there's options to do research outside of academia. There are incredible job opportunities. And I saw some of my friends who were anxious about the academic job market. They said, okay, well, if academia doesn't work on, let me make a plan B. And then plan B quickly turned into plan A because they ended up getting job offers before they even were able to interview for faculty positions. And so you just have to be mindful of the timescales that academia can run on, also those uncertainties. And so if academia or for that matter, a position at a national lab is something that you really want, it's important to keep that as plan A. And then if things don't work out, there's plenty of time downstream to think about plan B options, which tend to happen on a faster timescale.
Awesome, wonderful. And can we hear the comment from Dr. Hadley Sykes?
Yes, so I hesitate to give advice because I remember being a job candidate and listening to these panels, and survivorship bias is real. You're hearing statistics of small numbers who it happened to work out for. And so I guess I don't think that my experience necessarily generalizes. The one thing that I did want to say, though, echoes what Jesse was just saying. So it was a recession. I was pregnant with my first child, going on interviews during the first trimester, feeling completely nauseous the whole time. A lot was going wrong. But I had wanted to become a professor. For ever since I was in high school, this was the thing that I wanted to do. So I just figured I would go for it, give it the best I had, and figure out if it didn't work out, then figure out what to do after that point. So if that is a possibility, and I realize it isn't a possibility for everyone, but I think that is a good approach. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So reflecting back again when you were applying, so you mentioned already some of the challenges. Do you have any more challenges, and what our PhD should be thinking about now to mention, to add on it? I think anyone could answer that question.
I mean, if I can follow on the luck point a little bit more, because someone also raised it in the questions. So I have seven of my former postdocs and students, 6 of whom are postdocs, are all faculty around the country and world. And I think maybe only one of them tried once in one cycle. And I think half of them maybe tried three times, but I'd say the rest tried twice. So going back to sort of what I opened with, you do the best you can, absolutely on all fronts, and you prepare the best that you can in all ways. And there are a lot of uncontrollable factors, and it is due to what Hadley said, I think also the small numbers typically of departments and institutions that might be looking for your type of research, your type of teaching, your type of background, and so on and so forth, and the large pool of applicants. That means that you just have to be prepared to try more than once, and that's not failure. That's normal. That's healthy, normal. That's part of academic life, and in fact, it's a good entryway to academia, because almost everything that we do, despite the way our CVs look, where we have all our successes posted, we have a CV of failures on grants that have been rejected and papers that have been rejected that's 10 times as long. And that begins already with the faculty search process. And again, it's stressful and challenging, but it's something that is part of the academic life, and transcends it. And so I think that whether we were in a pandemic or not, or an economic recession or not, and whether teaching is changing or endowments are down or tuition is down or up, I think that you try the best that you can. And even if it were the best of conditions, most great candidates will still fail the first time, and sometimes the second. And my first PhD student is just starting on the faculty at Berkeley. And, she had a slightly longer postdoc and switched fields, and, was extremely successful and brilliant, but certainly had to persevere as well. And I can say the same for a number of my postdocs that have started at various positions around the country and world. So perseverance is important.
Thank you. Jesse, you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that was certainly in the last financial crisis, but in my subfield actually has been something that has persisted since then, has been people at the postdoc career stage really needing to ask how flexible they are and what sacrifices and trade-offs they're willing to make for their careers. So in my field, the number of faculty hires per year dropped roughly by a factor of 2 by the financial crisis. And then over the past decade has been slowly kind of getting back to where it was before, but not quite there. And there have been job opportunities, for example, more job opportunities in Europe than in the US in my particular subfield. And so it's been a conversation about how much geographic flexibility one has, how much family flexibility one has, and balancing those against career goals. That's a challenging thing, and one that I don't think any of us on this panel would be able to give advice for a specific situation, but it is something that one needs to weigh. And so part of the uncertainty and the anxiety that one faces is also a question of what one's priorities are. And it's a very personal decision. And for some people, they're willing to do the academic market no matter what, and will be willing to bounce around from institution to institution. For other people, they don't have that flexibility. And I think either way is valid, but it does play into the uncertainty and the anxiety.
Thank you, Jesse. And Callie, go ahead.
Sure, I would add a couple things, maybe more from the perspective of the search committee. I've been on 6 search committees and will be supposed to be chairing one this fall, although it is now frozen pending whatever the outcomes are. And I would say that maybe generalizing a little bit from that and from all the applications we've seen in that context, in terms of improving your luck and sort of thinking about where you fit in all of this, is the 2 things we really think about are tailoring of the made fit of a candidate for a position, which is challenging to predict, but you can do some things to improve your chances there, and your trajectory. And so that trajectory and potential are the 2 words that the search committee throws around the most. And so looking at someone who not just has a rock star paper at their PhD or a really awesome postdoc, but that actually looks like they will continue to have a trajectory going up. And so this is where this idea of flexibility can sometimes be very important. I followed my husband to a postdoc at Arizona State and had a staff position when I first got there. Negotiated with my boss to let me call it a research associate and have a tiny bit of my time dedicated towards research so that I could keep cranking out publications and try to avoid having a gap. Some of us will have some unavoidable gaps due to productivity related concerns during COVID, but to the extent possible that you can keep your CV looking like a trajectory going up so that when you come on board a university, we'll see that bear fruit as you continue towards tenure. And the other piece being tailoring. I can't tell you how many times we will get candidates and we'll ask them about their plans to do research in our institute, and they'll start talking about undergraduates. We're a graduate-only institute, so it's a big red flag that they haven't even really thought about what it means to work in our institute or really studied it or really thought about it. So to the extent possible, to spend the time, do your homework, try to understand what a department or a university is hoping to achieve with their search candidate and the candidate that they look to hire, and then tailor each one of your applications very directly towards that position. Because you might have the same package from job to job, but how it manifests in that position will be very different. And I think those are 2 things that you can try to do now to improve the luck of the draw.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not sure if Mary or Hadley have anything to add.
I don't. It looks like there are questions piling up,
Yes.
so maybe we want to turn to that.
So yes, Natalia and Sami have been monitoring our questions. So Natalia, take it away.
It actually is a perfect moment, and as it was just mentioned about the productivity. So now that some people's productivity has increased, some people's productivity has decreased, would that disqualify or maybe decrease chances of a candidate if they mentioned that the productivity because of lack of childcare has decreased? And I'm going to talk on another question. How would you approach negotiating your offer because the market is so competitive? There are few positions. Would you still try to negotiate the offer, or should you just take it as is?
I can try answering that. So I think everyone is obviously aware that productivity has been affected. I don't know anyone whose productivity has increased because of the pandemic, but maybe there are some. So I think it's certainly fine to be, I think it's always fine to be honest about these things. You know, you can say, many people, for example, may be in the situation where they thought their major paper would be published by this time or under review, but because of COVID haven't been able to finish things up. And so I think that's fine to still be on the job market, but just acknowledge that in things like your cover letter. I think the cover letter is very important to an application. This gets to what Callie was talking about in terms of tailoring your application to the institution. That's the place where you can talk about things like that. And also your letter writers will be very important for providing context for your work and perhaps why maybe a paper hasn't been published that you thought would be, and really promoting you and your work. So I think in terms of acknowledging that the pandemic has affected productivity, just being straight with that is fine. For the second part of the question, negotiation, I think you should always negotiate if there's things you want. Once you have the job offer, that is the time when you have power. You have less power after you accept the job offer. So I think, you know, if there are things you need to be successful, you should negotiate for them, because it's in the university's interest for you to be successful. They're putting a lot of money and time into you, and they want you to succeed. And so you definitely, you know, want to go to a place where you think you can succeed, and negotiating your offer may be part of that.
I wanted to answer this one because I think in my department, when we're looking at faculty candidates, we take an extremely holistic view. And so just what's happened in the past few months or year isn't going to be the whole story. I mean, we read the candidate statement, we try to understand their ideas and get excited about their ideas and see potential. I don't think productivity in just a few months is going to matter. And then in terms of negotiating, I agree, always negotiate with the understanding that maybe exactly what you want is hard for the chair to deliver, and maybe something equally valuable is easier for them to deliver. So think about the negotiation, not getting stuck just on one thing, but definitely negotiate. By the time a department agrees to extend an offer to the candidate, they really want them. It's been hard to reach that kind of consensus. So definitely negotiate.
Awesome, thank you. Natalia, do we have another question?
Yes, I can ask a question. So
Awesome.
someone mentioned that some places have extended an offer while others still considering or frozen. So what that candidate should do? Should he or she accept the offer he or she already received, or should wait for the better schools which are still on frozen or deciding something?
So I'm not sure if I can answer that question directly, but this situation of offers coming in at different times is not just because of a pandemic. This happens fairly regularly. And I have a former student who was in that situation. And that student actually was in an uncomfortable position of having accepted an offer, then getting an offer from a preferred institution, and then going back on the original acceptance. And my feeling about that is all's fair in love in academia. And I think people are understanding of situations like that. And it can feel like burning a bridge, but as long as you're open about kind of what one's needs are, I think it is understood that it's challenging for everyone. And I wouldn't ever feel like one's locked into a position, though of course one has to be mindful of the personalities involved. So in the situation that the question was asking about, I think being open about what's happening could probably be to the benefit of everyone. And I wouldn't see a problem with someone accepting a position and then, you know, a month or two later having to say, oh no, sorry, actually this other thing came along, especially if that other position were better for some other reason. But maybe my panelists, fellow panelists feel differently.
Yeah, I feel like once you accept, you should probably try to go. But I think that's true. There could be some special circumstances that really, because it could be disruptive because they may have lost the next candidate that they were going to go after to a different institution, and now they're left kind of hanging without anyone. So I think that one should take the time to carefully sort of negotiate, analyze, and then make a decision, and then try to stick to it if at all possible. I wanted to echo what a few other people said about talking about the pandemic situation in terms of productivity and so forth. I think that there's an opportunity to highlight your resilience and creativity and sort of optimism and positive outlook in the process of applying in this pandemic. By that, I mean, talk about the online learning and communication tools that you might have engaged in a new way that you hadn't been exposed to before. That's certainly true of myself, and I think the other faculty who were suddenly forced to teach online within a few weeks' notice. I've also had the opportunity to sit back and read in certain areas, as well as write in certain areas that I didn't have before, and have really opened up new perspectives and thoughts about research directions in my group. And I've also had a similar opportunity within my group, my mentees, to do the same. And our relationship and depth of conversation in our topics has also deepened and morphed in very positive ways. And I see many of these positive learning experiences propagating forward into the future of my career and their careers and our group's activities, as well as I think universities have changed, will have changed forever. I think the premise of campus life and what exactly it's for and how and meetings and all these things. So I think in terms of applying in your teaching statement, in your cover letter, in your research statement, I think I would advise against sort of using the pandemic as sort of a quote unquote excuse of, oh, I wasn't able to get this paper out because a lab was shut down for 3 months, but rather as an opportunity to try to spin it however you can positively, to show the committee and the university and the department how we're using that time positively, because that's, we have many setbacks all the time in research and teaching and academia, and I think it will highlight you in a special way if you come across as a very optimistic and proactive and sort of positive person, because we have downturns in funding and recessions that impact us in our careers, all the time. So I think that's important to just maybe highlight in thinking about how to present it. And the other thing that you have now that we didn't have 10 years ago is the bioarchive and sort of the proliferation of online preprint servers, where funding agencies as well as hiring committees certainly look at materials that are posted to the archive, even if they're not yet out in a journal. I've certainly had grants that were funded that way, and I think other things that are positive academia. So show your work, post it, and use sort of whatever tools there are to communicate what you've done and what you've been doing, as I think most people already do. But I think it's important to just mention again that there's a lot of opportunity to share your work, even if it's not yet officially online and published in a journal.
Callie, you had something to add?
Yes, I'd like to offer maybe a slightly different take, and maybe to try to make the invisible elephant visible, because I think that the question was really coming from the standpoint of some of the gender equity issues that we've seen due to COVID. And I think there is no question that this disruption will magnify the significant gender inequities, economic inequities, and now even racial inequities that are endemic to academia. So I don't want to say this from a negative point of view, but I think this is clear. It's been very difficult to sustain writing on papers while I'm also trying to teach my daughter the quadratic function at the same time. And so different academics have different responsibilities due to that. Now, what I think that maybe is a slightly different piece of what the question was sort of getting at is perhaps how receptive will committees be to these issues. My general sense, and again, I cannot, as Hadley eloquently put, I can't extrapolate from my own experience, but my philosophy has been that a workforce culture that supports diverse faculty and that offers the ability to sustain faculty at all different levels is a very important priority for me. And so if I got the sense from a hiring institute that there were some concerns, or that faculty among the search committee weren't even aware that these gender inequities were being perpetuated by COVID, I might question whether it was a good fit for me. And everyone makes those fit decisions based on their own perspective. And you will get a sense when you go to campus interviews, or even on maybe there'll be campus interviews, but maybe a Zoom interview, you'll get a sense of some of these things. And when things don't sit right with you about an academic entity, then it's probably something telling you that maybe it's not the right fit. but hopefully search committees will be increasingly aware of and receptive of some of these issues, and it will hopefully catalyze broader change in some of the inequitable practices that academia fosters historically.
Thank you, Kali. I think we have a follow-up question from Sami.
Yes, so if someone is currently doing a postdoc and gets an offer from a R2 institutions or a teaching intensive universities, then what are the future prospects? Will they able to move a R1 university later in their life, or they have to continue with the R2 or teaching intensive universities?
Not sure
I mean,
who.
maybe I'm the only one here that's not at an R1. I won't but speak very long on it, but I don't think that that's necessarily a limiter. My university in the time that I've been here has gone from a master's to a doctoral university. And so universities do change. And so I think part of what you want to look at is what is the underlying culture at that university and what are their long-term trends and plans and strategic vision, not just where they're at right at the time when you interview.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, my comments are for all universities. I think the vast majority of my former postdocs and students that are on at other universities are at, you know, well, a whole spectrum of universities, both globally, internationally, as well as different rankings and so forth. To echo Callie, I think there's no question compared to 10 years ago, if you, you know, I think committees in hiring are now more than ever going to be very much in tune to gender discrepancies, as well as discrepancies in underrepresented minorities. So if you are in those categories, then you know, your application will look very different today than it did 10 years ago, because I think there's a real reception and understanding about the importance of these issues in academia and an appreciation for them at all ranks of faculty as well as administration. At you know, any university that I've certainly been familiar with and in tune with. So I certainly echo that point of Callie's as well.
Awesome, thank you. I think Mary.
Still be positive in your application.
Awesome. So I think you have more questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, we started combining them in the interest of time. So I'm going to ask 4 questions in 2. The first one is, can you get a job offer from the university that has rejected you in the past? And would you get a feedback from that university who has rejected you? So that's the first question. Question number 2 is, that has gotten a lot of thumbs up. Some of the people feel that the people who did postdocs longer tend to be less qualified. Would the department hire postdocs who are younger and less years of a postdoc, no matter what? And how much of importance is the visa that the candidate may or may not need?
That's a lot to unpack.
Thank you, Natalia. So it's 3 questions, actually.
I could try answering some of those.
I'm happy to chime in too.
So I guess for the maybe I'll do the second one first. Visa, I've never found visa status to be at all a consideration on a search. That's at MIT, but I would think that's probably true at most places. So in terms of the length of the postdoc, you're right. If someone has been a postdoc for a very long time, that can be viewed negatively. But I think it's all a relationship between what you've done in that time and how long you've been a postdoc. I mean, I find that it's generally understood, for example, I'm a biologist. If you're doing experiments where you're doing genetic models in mice, that's going to take a lot longer if you're working in a yeast molecular biology project. So I think people do have different expectations depending on the type of research you're doing. And so what you want to, you know, if your postdoc has been considerably longer than its average. And in biology, I would say the average is what, 6 years, which is pretty long, 5 or 6 years. You want those additional years, either you're keep publishing great papers, or very legitimately, there's other issues such as having children, and those things are or should not be viewed negatively. And I think search committees are very aware of that as well now.
If I can comment about the first part about whether someone who's been rejected in the past, whether that be considered in the future. I recently chaired a faculty search committee. And indeed, a number of the applicants that we saw were applicants that we had seen in previous cycles. And some of the people we were considering were ones that we had even interviewed it either in a formal or informal way in the past. And I think hiring committees understand that people change, people's research trajectories can grow, and that I would not be discouraged by a rejection from the past for applying. And sometimes all it takes is 1 year for the work that you've been doing to catch fire in the field and make a difference for your hireability. I think there's a question.
I would like to add that committee members also change on those searches.
That is also true. But I think there's also a question about whether one can get feedback. And giving feedback is challenging, both because there's confidential information at play, but also as a member of the hiring committee, I'm not sure that I want to give feedback because if we reject someone, we may have just been wrong, and actually the feedback that we could give actually could impede their progress in the future. And so keeping an eye on junior people and how they're doing is the way that I see it as someone on the hiring side. And I don't see a rejection in 1 year as affecting their hireability in the future.
Thank you. I saw one question that was, it seems like panel will be focused on hiring academia more specifically. But if anyone has insight into national lab industry position as well, I think a lot of people may be interested in hearing about it. Well, that's a great point, but we're actually, the Postdoctoral Association will be organizing a similar panel with industry people. So just a heads up to everybody. So I think Natalia has more questions from the audience that we can take.
I could
Yes,
say
again,
one,
sorry.
I could say one on that topic of, so I didn't apply to national labs or industry, but the year I was on the job market, I was in Frances Arnold's lab, and she had an army of, she won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, and at that time she had an army of 25 postdocs. It was one of the most exciting work environments I've ever been in, but it was also challenging because I think 15 of us went on the job market all at once in a recession that year. And I think it was very much luck who got an academic job and who didn't. And all of the ones that didn't get academic jobs, I'd say are making more money than me and complain about their jobs less when we have our lab reunions. So I don't know firsthand how it is to be on the national lab or industry job markets, but I do have this example where it worked out really well for 15 people and they seem happier than me 10 years later.
That's a good one. Thank you. Natalia, back to you.
So again, two-part question. The first part is if someone wants to keep their academic job but needs a transitional position that is non-academic, how would you view that being on the hiring committee? And the second part, how important, if important at all, is to be active on social media such as LinkedIn or Twitter? Is that a necessity in these days or just an option?
I can speak to the first part because I had a similar experience. As I mentioned, I didn't have a formal postdoc. I created it on paper and then sort of reverse engineered the work to be a postdoc and continue publishing, because I think that there's a lot of value in industrial and non-academic positions that many academic employers can realize. For example, real world experience that you bring possibly to teaching or student advising. And I would say that's probably particularly true maybe for more engineering and technology fields, but I can't speak widely to others. So I think thinking about those non-academic positions in terms of what value add skills they can bring to the academic pipeline. But academic search committees will look at the most traditional metrics, which are things like publication history and potential, funding history and potential. So to the extent that you can continue to keep your publications coming out on top of whatever non-academic work you're doing and keep trying to get into the funding pipeline, I think those are very important if you're going to try to balance two things and still try for an academic career.
Thank you, Kelly. And now we're going to Sami. He also has questions for the panelist.
Yes, so one question is like now as we are all struggling for getting a job and especially for COVID-19 situation. But are there any basic characteristic that the hiring committee is looking for a candidate in general? Like when they're looking for a candidate, are they just looking for number of publications or number of grants or number of postdoctoral experience or all of them? Typically, like which one we should be focusing if an early postdoc? Because as an early postdoctoral fellow, we still have a couple of years to build ourselves and to focus on those areas which we partly lack in expertise.
Who wants to go?
So I can say the advice that I give anyone who asks. I mean, and so this is for physics, but it holds for any field. But I say there are as many ways to be a successful physicist as there are successful physicists, and there are different pathways to success. Some of them can be built off of one's portfolio. Some can be built off one's ideas. And a hiring committee is trying to evaluate the best aspects of a candidate and trying to see whether they have all the criteria that would make for a successful faculty member, but they can be very different. That's what makes it also difficult as far as the hiring process, is that I can't tell you, okay, here's the number of publications, here's the number of citations, here's the number of conference talks. It doesn't work that way. And that's also why it's, again, difficult to compare candidates who have different experiences, different backgrounds, different research directions.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and maybe follow a little bit by saying, generally in academia, as well as in life, you'll have advocates, and often very strong advocates, both from your former research advisors, postdoc, PhD advisors, but also then on the hiring committee, typically, given that someone's area might be similar to yours and really be able to judge your area well. And those advocates can then drive a lot of the process of hiring, as well as then future mentoring and so forth. So as you're tailoring your application to the department, as I think Hadley or Callie mentioned, think about who your advocates may be in that specific department that you're applying to, based on your synergies and sort of mutual interests in research and other, teaching and so forth. And then as you get into the interview process, I think try to nurture those relationships and deepen and strengthen them because, as Jesse said, it's the hiring process is a very, very individualistic process where it requires, a lot of sort of deep insight into the person's approach and background, experience, outlook to come to hiring decisions. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well in the tailoring process.
Thank you. I hear Natalia has more. Oh, Dr. Sykes, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think in pitching yourself as a faculty candidate, you want to paint a picture of what success looks like to you as a, what's your lab going to do? What are you going to create? What are you going to contribute to the world that doesn't exist yet? And so it doesn't exist yet. So you need to explain it to them. You need to convey, what do you have in mind? And then there's things that we're counting, papers, conference presentations, grants. Those kind of serve as pieces of supporting evidence that you can do what you have in mind. So that's how I think about it. You really need to be able to describe and have the hiring committee and the faculty who are going to be voting understand what is your vision of what you're going to create and get excited about it and say, yeah, I want that in my department. I want that person's name. I want that on our letterhead.
Awesome, thank you. So we have final 5 minutes for questions.
Could I add something? Because I saw some questions coming out in the search about other types of institutes. And again, I would just really underscore to those of you on the market to really understand the DNA of the department that you're looking to hire into. So for example, our department is very focused on graduate education. So we're not just looking about your ability to do research, we're also looking at your ability to mentor and train and recruit and retain a diverse and vibrant body of graduate students. So really concrete evidence around leadership and mentorship and teaching. Some of you all might be looking for more teaching intensive universities. And so it's challenging to get teaching experience as a grad or postdoc, but there's many things you can still do as a proxy. Some of our students participate in Toastmasters organizations to work on polishing their public speaking. Others take opportunities to work with community organizations or K-12 schools. So it's a matter of finding any pieces of evidence. And I like the idea of supporting evidence that was mentioned. You don't have to have already on your CV the exact things that you'll be doing in the faculty job. All you need to have is some evidence that you have the potential to do those things in the long run. And I think that's true for many different kinds of positions that you might be going after, R1 or more blended or more teaching focus or small liberal arts, whatever it may be.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, MIT also has Kaufman teaching certificate to help with teaching experience. And so we are at 4:01. We have 5 more minutes for a few questions from the audience. Natalia, take it away.
If some of you could highlight the entire faculty hiring process from start to finish, and I would like you to include the timelines and then the etiquette in following up. How should a potential candidate behave? Should they reach out? Should they not? What's too aggressive? What's not aggressive enough?
Thank you, Natalia. Who's gonna try to give it a try?
I can give it a try if everyone backs me up here. So, I mean, I'll describe a normal situation, but as we talked about at the beginning, it's not clear how much of a normal situation we're going to be, and job ads may be coming out at different times. So the usual process is job ads for faculty positions start coming out in August and September. They usually have application deadlines by mid-October through December, most of them. And you'll be asked to put together several things for your job application. You'll need probably 3 letters of recommendation, possibly more. You'll need a research statement, a teaching statement. If it's a more teaching focused university or college, you'll probably need more teaching philosophy as well. You'll have a cover letter. So each of these documents is a few pages. So a research statement is just a few pages where you have to really succinctly describe your vision for what your lab would be doing in the next few years and your longer term vision as well. Many institutions, so a search committee will comprise, I don't know, 5 or 6 faculty perhaps, usually at different stages, of their careers. Different departments do this differently, even within a single institution. So it's hard to say exactly how a search committee is constituted, but your application will be reviewed usually by more than one person. And usually there's kind of an initial cut, and many institutions are now doing Skype interviews. That wasn't really a thing when I was on the job market. And usually those Skype interviews have a set of questions that everybody is asked the same thing. That might happen in December, it might happen in January. or even earlier than that. And then there'll be on-campus interviews. Again, we have no idea whether or not this will happen this year. Those would generally be January through even April. And then search committees are making decisions on who they want to hire. That has to be approved by the university, so that's usually kind of a long process. And so maybe you finally kind of know where you're going to end up. You know, if you're going to get an offer, maybe it could be anywhere between February and April. And then you're, if they do make you an offer, usually you're going back and doing another visit or negotiating startups and things like that. So this is what one of the panelists was mentioning earlier. If you do this thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to hedge my bets by applying to academic jobs and applying to industry positions, you could get an industry job and they want you to start in 2 weeks. And so the timescales are completely different, which makes it very difficult to do both. That's the timeline. That's kind of that's the process. There's many things I left out. If people want to, my panelists want to jump in and save me on this one.
I think the hardest thing is, I think that's a great timeline. I think the hardest thing is that's sort of their timeline. I think you have to establish your timeline in terms of how far in advance you want to prepare for certain things. And that's a really hard thing to do because you're so busy writing papers and parenting and doing the other things that everyone is doing. So identifying those deadlines and key time points, and then very far in advance, starting to prepare and think about your materials. And that might be your research or your teaching statement, or your cover letter. And I know the Postdoctoral Association has mentoring as well, that I've participated in the past in groups of postdocs that get feedback from faculty along the way. Skype interviews are really critical now. We've had them for several years and they're short. They're only 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour. They can go really well or they can go really poorly. And I think talking about luck and how to sort of stack cards in your favor, well, practice the Skype interviews with colleagues several times because there's a real opportunity to do really well in them and go to the next step, but there's a real opportunity to also fail, but undeservedly so, because it's a really hard format and it's very time pressured and it's just really challenging. And so it's kind of like the SATs being predictive of whether you're good at math. My SAT scores weren't great in math, but you know, I ended up at MIT and did reasonably well. So, you know, I think these types of things one just has to accept as part of the system and then just try to prepare the best you can. And I think there are a lot of opportunities in establishing your own timeline based on Mary's timeline of the Institute's timeline to really optimize your package and your approach.
Awesome, thank you. So we are at the last few minutes of this webinar. So my last question would be dedicated to perhaps providing some solutions. For example, how can the MIT Postdoctoral Association support or better serve the needs of postdocs during these times?
So one thing that's come up, but let me just emphasize it, is the importance of having mentors to give you advice about the process. And one thing that I've wondered is whether we can help postdocs extend their mentoring networks in a more formal way. So even now, as a faculty member, I can probably count, let's say, 5-ish people who are older than me that I trust to give me advice. And that number of around 5, I probably needed roughly that number through my whole career. And not all students, not all postdocs have an extensive mentor network like that. And if there's a way that the Postdoc Association can help build that and help postdocs build that, I think that would be beneficial, since I didn't know anything about the faculty job search until I had some people set me straight. So
in fact, we are just starting the postdoctoral mentoring program with academia and industry, where there's a group of postdoctoral postdocs with a few mentors from academia or industry, and so we're launching that. Well, it's been going on for a few years, but we are testing this time via Zoom, so we'll see how it goes.
Right.
That's great. I participated in that last year. It was fantastic, really fun group of postdocs, I think 7 or 8 of them. And I think there's a lot of really useful feedback amongst the group, sharing research statements and teaching statements and cover letters and you know, helping along the process. So it's fun.
Awesome. And then I was wondering if any of you has any other takeaways for our PhDs. Callie, you may start.
I guess I would say is that academia is not the only answer. There's a wide array of jobs out there that will benefit from your research experience and your passion and your ability to write and communicate. So I would, you know, not all PhDs will go down an academic path, and that doesn't mean that that's a failure, and that doesn't mean that that's the only path you can go down. There's so many things in the world that will benefit from your expertise. And so I would really encourage you to really think about where your skills and your passion and your dreams lie, and then look at all kinds of different career opportunities to fulfill those.
Thank you, Callie. Mary or Hadley, do you have anything to add, like final takeaways?
Well, I think Callie stated it very eloquently. So, you know, I think, yeah, it's frustrating because there is so much uncertainty in the whole process. And you can see friends of yours who are really great researchers and they didn't get an academic job, and other people that did, and you can't really tell what's the difference. A lot of it comes down to the particular departments you're applying to and what they're looking for and what they need at that moment. And it's really hard. You know, you can't, in this academic job search, you can't really be anything you're not. And it will benefit you if you really do showcase yourself and what you're interested in. And for a lot of you, that'll work out great. And for others of you, there won't be that fit that particular year. So I do think, you know, being able to try an additional year if something doesn't happen in the first time is really important. And also, as Kelly said, just really thinking about where you can contribute, and that there are more places to contribute than just in academia. But if that's the path you really want to pursue, then you should definitely try it. You know, I was in a similar position as I think what Hadley mentioned. Like I really wasn't sure, and I was like, well, I'll try and I'll see what happens. If I get a job, great. If I don't, I'll figure something else out.
Awesome. Well, let's thank our panelists, our moderators, and all the attendees for their awesome questions. After this panel, we will also send out a follow-up email to attendees with contact information of our panelists for any follow-up questions, and a link to this recording of the webinar. Also, we will send out the list of interview questions compiled by Bob Dolan from Career and Development Office, and many of those questions were for Skype interviews. And I really hope everyone on this webinar makes the cut. So stay tuned for our next event on pda.mit.edu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.